Welcome into the Fantasy Football Forge. My name is Steve, and it is time for the Week 11 wide receiver fantasy football rankings. And a couple of notes at the top of the show here. First of all, T. Higgins has already been ruled out for tonight's game, so obviously the rankings are taking that into effect. And I will be ranking the Rams wide receivers as if Stafford is playing. I really don't know if he's going to play or not. The wide receivers are a bit tough to rank this week, not the easiest week, and really after the top 36 wide receivers, it becomes a bit of a hodgepodge. So I know there will be more shuffling around within the top 36, I'm sure, as we get to the Saturday video where I update my rankings. But in the meantime, the next 60 plus wide receivers that I have ranked, I still need to go through those, but you can see all of the players that I have ranked up on the website, www.dffforge.com. There's a link down in the description. You can see it above me, and you can also come visit me live 1.5 hours prior to kickoff for the Thursday night game, 3 hours prior to kickoff on Sunday before the main slate of games. I'll be here on YouTube live for any of your start-sit questions and just to hang out, ask questions, etc. And as always, red is good, blue is bad, white is neutral for anything that is highlighted in those colors. And before we can get on to this week's rankings, we need to look back to last week, see how I did with my DFS plays. You can see my DFS plays for this week at the end of this video, and of course my love'ems and my fade'ems. For my DFS plays at the bottom of the barrel, such a big tournament long shot, I gave you Michael Wilson at $3,500. That did not come together. That did not work out. And I said that I was going to be taking a shot on paying up for Monroe St. Brown versus the Chargers at $8,300. Ended up as the wide receiver 4 on the week, so that worked out. And for a contrarian play, I assumed that people would be looking past Keenan Allen, who cost $8,000 DK bucks, because Stephon Diggs was just a couple $100 more than him. Jamar Chase was just a couple $100 less than him, and he finished as the wide receiver 1 on the week. So all in all, pretty good there for my DFS plays. For my love'ems, I did okay. I ended up giving you 4 of them because I couldn't quite kick Romeo Doubs out of there. He finished as the wide receiver 30 on the week. I know that's higher than the ECR, and somewhere around where I had him ranked, probably a little bit better than where I had him ranked. So that was good for Romeo Doubs. Christian Kirk did okay. Not up to as good as he wanted, ended as the wide receiver 25, so a little bit disappointing there. DK Metcalf ended as the wide receiver 16, so that worked out fine. And DeAndre Hopkins ended as the wide receiver 57, so that did not work out. And apparently I was not the only one who loved DeAndre Hopkins last week, so just a huge disappointment overall for fantasy. And for my fade'ems, I gave you Garrett Wilson, DJ Moore, and Devontae Adams. Garrett Wilson I ended up as the wide receiver 15. Luckily, I don't think I ended up advising anybody to sit him for my start-sit questions last week. I feel pretty confident that at least in most situations I ended up picking him, so that was good. DJ Moore ended as the wide receiver for 35, so good choice there. Thought that was pretty obvious. Devontae Adams ended as the wide receiver 24, so I think he did a little bit better than where I had him ranked, but also did worse than where the ECR was. Going to take a slight victory on Devontae Adams there. But that is it. Let's get on to the Week 11 rankings for the wide receivers. And you can see up on your screen now my top wide receivers, the projections for them. Tyreek Hill is my wide receiver 1 on the week, followed by Monroe St. Brown, A.J. Brown, Keenan Allen, CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, Stephon Diggs, and Brandon Ayuk. I think that you should put these guys into your lineup without any question. And it's not going to be a whole lot different from my second tier. However, I'm just less confident with the guys in my second tier. And so one thing that I might have to explain with this tier is DJ Moore up ahead of Garrett Wilson. For me, I'm pretty confident in DJ Moore's return, and I love the upside with that return. It was one more week for Justin Fields to heal from that thumb injury. I was concerned about it last week. I have a lot more confidence in it this week, especially because the team has said that he is going to be the quarterback early on in the week. So I thought that was a huge confidence booster for me in terms of Justin Fields and DJ Moore were absolutely dynamite if you have not forgotten by now. At the end of the day, I would rather go for that ceiling of DJ Moore compared to what really is not any kind of ceiling for Garrett Wilson, is just a good floor for him. He's been solid all season long, but take the shot on that ceiling with DJ Moore. If it came down to those two, hopefully you could put them both in your lineup. Then Mike Evans I have in at my wide receiver 11, and he dropped out of the first tier. Originally, I had him ranked an 8th. I had him one spot ahead of Brandon Ayuk. Then I thought about it a little more, thought about how the San Francisco defense operates, and they have allowed the third most receptions per game on the season, and they've allowed the third least yards per reception, per completion, per reception on the season. They force teams to get the ball out quick, and that's not really going to be the Mike Evans throw. That's going to be Chris Godwin, who should be able to benefit from that the most. And so I am fading Mike Evans this week. I'm not super excited about the upside for him. Going to probably take a goal line touchdown for him to have a bigger day. Not the usual big plays I think are less likely to occur in this game. So just a little bit concerned about his productivity this week. Expecting limited output, but you're probably going to play him anyways. Wide receiver 12, we have Cooper Kupp, and wide receiver 13, we have Adam Thielen. And both of them, I just think that you have to trust them, roll with them, despite how unconfident you might be in those plays. Let's move on to my third tier of wide receivers, which goes from wide receiver 14 to 22 in this order. Deebo Samuel, Christian Kirk, Nico Collins, Tank Dell, Jalen Waddle, DK Metcalf, Devontae Adams, Devonta Smith, and Justin Jefferson to wrap that tier up, if he is playing, of course. Not going to talk about everybody in this tier. If I'm close to the ECR, we're just going to pass over them. So the first two to talk about are going to be Nico Collins and Tank Dell. Of course, if Nico Collins does not play, that changes my viewpoints on Tank Dell overall. But I will say for both of them that the Arizona Cardinals have not been some sort of great wide receiver matchup up to this point in the season. I do think that might change for the rest of the season with Kyler Murray now helming the offense there. Their defense might be tested a little bit more by other teams who are going to have a more potent offense on the other side of the field. That would be the expectation. I also expect that this game is going to be high scoring, in which case, Nico Collins has been the better wide receiver on the season, so that is why I have him ranked ahead of Tank Dell. It's pretty close, and either one of them could have a big game. Both of them could have a big game, so I like to start either one of them if I have them. Then Jalen Waddle is my wide receiver 18 there. The ECR is higher on him, so let's talk about him a little bit. The EV, wide receiver 19 on the season for me, that is the equalized value. That is a homebrew statistic that I take care of. Essentially, it's like average fantasy points per week. However, it does favor consistency. It is less subject to big games swaying what the average looks like for those players. Las Vegas, the Raiders, they are the 7th worst wide receiver matchup. That said, I do expect that Miami is going to be absolutely bringing it against Las Vegas this week, have another one of their big weeks, but I would bet on the likes of Tyreek Hill and both of the running backs, Raheem Mostert and Devon Achane, to maybe have the highest chances of having big weeks due to the team having a big week. Of course, Jalen Waddle could also get involved. Nothing against Jalen Waddle. I just have him a little bit lower because that's how he's performed so far this season. Essentially, I think right around, what did I say? EV, wide receiver 19 on the season. There you go. Wide receiver 19, I have DK Metcalf. Devontae Adams, I'm lower than the ECR. The ECR is higher than me. EV wide receiver 36 so far on the season. Wide receiver 24 game last week. I do think that is about his ceiling. That said, the Miami Dolphins, this matchup, you would think that they should have to pass a lot more than they have, and they probably will have to turn to the pass a lot more. So I could definitely be wrong on Adams this week. He, especially for like full PPR purposes, could definitely see a lot of targets and hopefully catch a lot of those targets. That's one of the issues. The other issue for me is that the Miami Dolphins defense has gotten healthier. They've gotten better than Jalen Ramsey back there. And so I do expect them to be better than they've been all season going forward. And they already weren't some sort of great matchup. They were about an average matchup for wide receivers prior to or coming into this week. Then Devonta Smith, I have as my wide receiver 21. ECR is also higher on him. Dallas Goedert is out, so that is part of the reason why everybody should have more optimism for Devonta Smith, at least in the short term, while Dallas Goedert is out. Nothing else compared to how he's performed so far on the season. However, going up against Kansas City defense, it's been a pretty darn good defense. They are the 9th worst wide receiver matchup so far on the season. So I am a little bit concerned about him. I'm also concerned about my fade on him. I could definitely eat crow on that one. And Justin Jefferson have at wide receiver 22 here. Obviously going to be Josh Dobbs throwing to him. There's some concern about that, some concern about his health. If he even returns, I don't know how optimistic they are about him returning this week. So we'll just see on that. And ultimately, though, I just like him at the bottom of this third tier. He's not a must start for me necessarily, but at the same time, I'm going to start him over a lot of people because he is Justin Jefferson. He's fantastic, and Josh Dobbs has done quite well so far in that offense, and Justin Jefferson can work out of the slot really well, where Josh Dobbs is going to have an easier time getting the ball into his hands. So slightly optimistic about that duo working out all right. That brings us up to Terry McLaurin, wide receiver 23. My fourth tier here, wide receiver 24, I have Puka Nacua, followed by Courtland Sutton, Chris Godwin, Tyler Lockett, and Marquise Brown to wrap this tier up at wide receiver 28. As far as Terry McLaurin goes, the Giants have become the third best wide receiver matchup on the season. They allow the third most yards per completion, which is a stat that might favor Jahan Dotson, although it would be really tough to trust him in redraft, that's for sure, but maybe a DFS option, just keep that in mind. Then I have Puka Nacua at wide receiver 24, believe I'm lower than him than the ECR, and I'm just being cautious with Puka Nacua. Seattle is a good matchup so far on the season, but they have been tougher as of late, and once again, just being cautious with him and optimistic with Cooper Kupp, but both of them concern me for maybe slightly different reasons. Then we have Courtland Sutton in at wide receiver 25. Chris Godwin is a love him for me going up against San Francisco. And I just talked about why I am concerned about Mike Evans, so it's the opposite reason. I talked about it a little bit there. Chris Godwin, I expect, especially for full PPR purposes, expect him to get targeted heavily and potentially have a feastful week. Then Tyler Lockett I have at wide receiver 27, nothing much there. Marquise Brown I have at wide receiver 28, and he is a love him for me as well. I'm still very optimistic about him. I'm optimistic about this offense going forward with Kyler Murray at the helm. Thought last week was as good as it could have been, and I expect a high-scoring game between Arizona and Houston. In addition to that, I think that our opinions or our viewpoint of Marquise Brown would be a lot different this week had he connected, Kyler Murray connected with him on a deep pass that would have been a touchdown, would have been, a lot more fantasy points scored with that one big play, and I do think that he should be seeing more targets in most games too than he saw last week. That brings us to my final tier for the top 36 wide receivers this week. At wide receiver 29, we have DeAndre Hopkins, Rashee Rice, Deontay Johnson, Jordan Addison, Zay Flowers, Tyler Boyd, George Pickens, Amari Cooper. Just going to fly through this, have something written about each of them. So DeAndre Hopkins, there is still hope for him, in my opinion, this week going up against Jacksonville D, who allows the third most receptions per game. They allow the 10th most yards per reception, which is a good matchup specifically for DeAndre Hopkins in that matter. And they are a slightly above average matchup per average fantasy points per game allowed to wide receivers per game. Then Rashee Rice at wide receiver 30, going up against a Philadelphia defense who allow the single most receptions per game, and they are the single best wide receiver matchup for that same statistic that I just went over for the Jacksonville D as far as being an average matchup. Teams have begun to focus on slowing Travis Kelce down, and that has definitely been felt by Travis Kelce owners. And he's a rookie. The post-bye breakout is a thing. It does happen. Teams do go in, reevaluate, get to a certain point, retool their offenses to go forward for the rest of the season. We're a little bit deep into the season too, so that I think helps for those rookie breakouts and the potential that the team will say, okay, we need to get you more involved. And Rashee Rice has been their number one wide receiver. Someone has to step up, and my bet would be on Rashee Rice. So I love him this week, and an excellent matchup for him to have a good week. The risk is that he's, the same thing that he's been all season, 4 or 5 targets. Probably not going to do it. You need a touchdown at that point. Then wide receiver 31, Deontay Johnson versus George Pickens at wide receiver 35. Just going to compare the two here because of the matchup, the Cleveland defense matchup. They allow the least receptions per game by a big margin, but they do allow the 12th highest yards per reception. And who would that favor? George Pickens. George Pickens would be your deep ball guy. Deontay Johnson would probably suffer, especially for full PPR this week, going up against Cleveland. And so that's why I have a fade on Deontay Johnson, just going to have to work with a limited amount of receptions, whereas George Pickens could take advantage of the fact that they are a little bit weak, deeper ball throws, and that's what he specializes in. Jordan Addison, I have at wide receiver 32. He makes me nervous, especially if Justin Jefferson is back. And the Denver defense has been doing well lately. They've not been a doormat. Zay Flowers at wide receiver 33 going up against the Cincinnati Bengals. And they are the second best wide receiver matchup. So why isn't Zay Flowers higher? Well, I'm pretty optimistic about him this week. But the concern would be that this type of matchup, Cincinnati, would favor the deep threat because they're another team that allows... I think they might allow the number one, I don't know why I didn't write it down, most yards per completion. And so that should favor guys on their team in this order, I think. Rashad Bateman, Nelson Aguilar, OBJ. Of course, that's more, at least outside of OBJ, more of a DFS thing. But Rashad Bateman's been truly the deep threat guy. I don't think they've connected on a whole lot of attempts, but this would be the game where maybe they could and be a big play. Nelson Aguilar only gets in for 1 or 2 targets, but that is what he does. He goes deep. Then, of course, OBJ is just a deeper threat guy than Zay Flowers is. Tyler Boyd's another guy that I'm concerned about due to the opponent going up against Baltimore. I think it could be a tough week for this Cincinnati offense, but I also think that this game could turn into a shootout, much like last week between Baltimore and Cleveland. So I'm cautiously optimistic and cautiously pessimistic at the same time. George Pickens I have at wide receiver 35, and we already talked about him, Amari Cooper, to wrap this up. I don't trust DTR, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, if you're not familiar. Their quarterback this week already been named the quarterback, with Deshaun Watson being out for the rest of the season. And so his average yards per passing attempt was 3.5 yards per attempt. And that was in one game, a short sample size. I did not really like his deep throwing abilities at the combine. And to just give you an idea of how low an average yards per pass attempt that is, the 3.5 number, on average, the rest of 31 other starters, current starters of the teams in the league, which includes a lot of rookies, is 7.1 yards. So, yeah, that's concerning for Amari Cooper, a guy who really has been thriving with the deeper throws this week going up against Pittsburgh. I don't like it, and Pittsburgh's pass rush should also give DTR some issues. So that is my top 36 this week. Feel free to comment, ask any questions that you have on players, all those kinds of things. But what we do need to cover before the end of the video, and please like, comment, and subscribe. So we'll do that right now. Then I'll just say goodbye at the end of the video instead of saying that then. But before I say goodbye, we do have my DFS buys of the week. So, bottom of the barrel, big tournament, long shot kinds of guys here. Rashad Bateman at $3,100. You could also, of course, go OBJ. Like I said there, he has produced more this season. But Rashad Bateman actually gets more targets per game, as long as I looked that up, saw that correctly. And so I like that matchup. Talked about that just a short bit ago. And it's the same thing here for George Pickens at $4,900. Also like him for taking a shot on a guy. And who am I for sure taking a shot on is going to be Amon-Ra St. Brown again this week at $8,800, and Brandon Ayuk at $7,200 going up against Tampa Bay. Like that a lot, like them both a lot. Contrarian play this week, going to give you a couple of names as well, so I'm loading you up with wide receiver names this week. Nico Collins at $6,700 is going to be my contrarian play. Tank Dell has, of course, all of the hype so far going currently. He has all of the hype, and people tend to not trust and like Nico Collins, and Tank Dell costs $800 less. So I think Tank Dell will be taken a lot. Nico Collins, coming off of an injury and everything, probably won't be used as much, but as long as he's healthy, good to go. I like him quite a bit. And Jahan Dotson at $5,100. No one wants to touch that after a goose egg that he laid last week. And as we covered, the Giants do like to allow the deep throw, where Jahan Dotson could take advantage of that. So that is it. Now, goodbye. Thank you very much. Peace out.